Hello, today I'm going to be going through basic host profiles for use with auto-deploy. Host profiles are really necessary when using auto-deploy. It really isn't feasible to be configuring these settings each time a host reboots, because remember, an ESXi host booted through auto-deploy runs purely in memory. So it's going to lose those settings every time it's rebooted. So the way we address that is we configure a host profile. We then apply that host profile automatically every time a host gets either rebooted or booted for the first time. So there are some things that you can do in order to stage your environment, and I've done them already. We've discussed DHCP reservations. DNS records are optional, but really I think it's highly recommended unless you want all your hosts to come up in vCenter with their IP addresses. If you have their A records created, they'll come up by name, which I think is most people's preference. Also, working with Workstation 10 and also other hypervisors and virtual machines, they will allow you to actually set the MAC address on the virtual NIC, and by doing that, that helps you to stage your environment. I'll show you exactly what I'm referring to. So each of these IP addresses has already been set up, 200 through 203 in the 192.168.1.x range, and they also have corresponding A records with those IPs. So if I take a look at my rules, you'll see I've created two rules. One is an image rule and one is the cluster rule. And so it's just an image and a cluster, no profile right now. And additionally, in order to pre-stage, I have created a cluster here, and as you can see, I have done some testing with this already, but it's been removed, so we can start from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So remember, when you're configuring your virtual machines that are going to be nested ESXi hosts, there are some things you may want to do. I've found it does not work very well with anything less than 4 gigs of memory. I've had all kinds of issues applying the profiles, creating new profiles, things of that nature. You may want to add multiple network cards. I'm going to stick to one for the time being. In a later module, I may want to do some work with distributed vSwitches or advanced networking. You're going to need more than one NIC for that. Always, as a good practice, remove unnecessary hardware. I don't need a hard disk right now, so I remove the hard disk, the CD-ROM, and really everything that isn't directly necessary. I'll be customizing the MAC addresses because I find that that's just, when you see how well it works, I think you'd be very impressed. So as we did in our previous auto-deploy module, I mentioned that you boot the first host, you then do all your host profile customizations, and then subsequent hosts will pick those up, and that's what we're going to be covering right now. So without further ado, I'm going to come in here to Workstation. I am going to create a new virtual machine. Typical. I'll install the operating system later. vmware-ESX nest 1. We're going to drop it in Workstation. We'll make a new folder there called nested 1. Have to create a disk, which we can just remove later. Finish. Okay, I'm going to edit the virtual machine settings. Memory 4 gigs. Really, I don't think that that's an option. You need that. If you're having issues in your lab, that could very well be the cause. I also need to change my networking to bridged. Come in here to advanced. I'm going to give it that custom MAC address. That MAC address corresponds to the reservation we've configured. So these are the same. Okay, oops, I'll just cancel that for now. So I'm going to throw the switch, and if everything goes well, it should boot. So what should happen here is DHCP should assign it the correct IP address, which in this case is 192.168.1.200. That is going to match this auto deploy rule because it falls in the range 200 to 204. It'll then be redirected to the correct vCenter with the auto deploy server, which holds the image. It'll then download the image and begin to boot. It can take a little while. Usually it's pretty quick, but I'm just going to pause while we wait. Might give it a couple seconds. Okay, so as you can see, it's begun to boot. It's downloaded the tramp file from the TFTP server. If you're having problems getting to this point or beyond this point, take a look at your DHCP server settings and your TFTP server settings. Remember, you need to have configured, I believe it's option 66 is the TFTP server name, and you need to configure option 67, which is the boot file name. Then check your TFTP server. It should have some logs that shows whether or not the nested host is actually hitting that TFTP server and downloading the boot file. And once it's hit this point, you're now downloading the image off your auto deploy server, and it should boot into your vCenter. The next point you'll see it, once this is fully booted, you will see it come into, and in this case I've configured two rules. So the image rule is 1. The second one is it's going to place it in this cluster. So that was part of my pre-staging. As you can see, I've got two vCenters. One is the protected environment. One is the DR environment, where we're going to do some SRM stuff later on. For now, it doesn't have anything, doesn't have a host. I'm going to give this a few minutes to boot up, and we'll pick it up once it's back in the vCenter. Okay, we're back, and as promised, the host has appeared in my vCenter in the correct cluster as well. So you can see, once you get to this point on your virtual machine, once the virtual nested host is at this point in the console, you should see it in your vCenter. If you don't see it in your vCenter, there could be a few issues, but there is an issue. If you don't see it at this point, something's not right. So I'm going to go through what I consider to be some of the basic settings. These are really settings that all hosts really should have. There's only one here that's optional. It's my personal preference to allow SSH into the hosts, just because we're going to be working with some PowerCLI scripts at a later time, and that's really, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. You'll find yourself having to SSH into the host all the time to do troubleshooting and that sort of thing. I turn it on. It's turned off by default. You'll also get a warning message when it's turned on. So you don't have to turn it on if you don't want to. Part of my pre-stage, I created a cluster already, and so we'll move to probably the most important thing is for you to change the local password, because it does start with a blank one. Now, so I'll take you through the two methods that you can use for dealing with host profiles and updating them. First, we're going to need to actually create one. We don't have one at all. So I'm going to create a profile from this host. I'm going to call it NH1. You can put a description of whatever you want in there. So we now have a host profile which has the most basic settings, because, as I said, when it first booted up it had nothing at all. You'll notice we have a warning about no shared storage. Shared storage is where all the magic happens with virtualization. If you don't have shared storage, you're not going to be able to do some of the really cool things that you can do with the product. So we can go through that at a later time, creating some shared storage. I use iSCSI for my lab. but we can, as I said, go through that in another video. So changing the local password. So I can change this locally, and then I can go into and create a new, and update the profile from the host. But I don't find that works all the time. I don't really know why. I have a couple of ideas why that might not work. And I'll demonstrate that as we go through here. So instead what I do is I come in here to Edit Profile, Security Configuration, Administrator Password. We're going to configure a fixed administrator password. Okay, so that's done. Now, immediately what we've done just now is we are now out of sync. This host is no longer in sync with the host profile, so I'm going to update it. First I'm going to attach the host profile to the cluster that host is living in. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to update the host profile. Now you'll notice you need to be in maintenance mode in order to do this. And so it's a little hard doing this in a production environment. That's why it's very important to get these profiles correct the first time. Because if you notice something's wrong and you want to change it, and you also want to change the host profile, you then have to place the host in maintenance, move all your workloads over. Some workplaces can be very picky about that. I've worked in places that didn't even allow DRS on their clusters. I've worked in places where HA had to be certified before they turn it on, and they had to do all kinds of testing with it. And most smaller companies, they don't. They trust the technology a little bit more, but I mean, working for a very big one, you're gonna have to justify why you want to put a host in maintenance mode and why you want to vMotion all the workloads around. So as I said, very important to get this right the first time. So I did whip through that a little bit. You might have noticed it actually told you what it's going to change when you apply the host profile, and in that case it was just the password. I want to go one more extra step. I'm going to remove this host entirely because I want to make absolutely sure that change was recognized. So I've removed it, and I'm now going to add the host back in. And that was NH1.ITDEMOGUY.ca. Okay, so it's back in, and we'll just throw the eval license on it. Okay, so the first setting has been configured successfully. Now, you may be thinking, wow, that was a really roundabout way to do that. And it is, but I want to make sure that it's done properly. I do not want to come back or go to log into the host and realize the password is still blank. You'd be amazed. It happens, and you'll just be like, what happened? And the reason, this is something that I was mentioning earlier, the reason a lot of that can that can happen a lot of the time is because you're making changes on the host and then updating the profile, and then you're updating the profile and then you're applying those to the host. And sometimes if you're making changes in both places, one will overwrite the other. And that's when you may notice, wait a second, I know I set this properly. Why is it not here? And that's your reason, most likely. Okay, so secondly, I've added my iSCSI storage there, so it's going to do a rescan, and it's going to take a few minutes. You'll notice it's grayed out and inactive as it gets added in. I'm going to make a few more changes on the host directly to the host, and then I'm going to update those changes on the profile. And I want to make sure that I do that each time I make a change, because if I don't, as I said, you can end up overwriting changes and losing changes that you wanted to keep. So the next one I'm going to configure is the time configuration. Now, one thing I noticed with a lot of these screens is, and you'll see me change one thing and then come out of it, because I find that if you sometimes try and do more than one at the same time, it actually doesn't work. So this is a habit I've gotten into. It might not be necessary anymore with new changes as bug fixes come out and so on, but I've found it to be absolutely necessary. Okay, so our time settings, I've changed the NTP time to time.windows.com. So a couple things that can happen here. You may notice this turn red. It means it didn't sync properly. It's happened to me in the past where that's happened. Generally speaking, or in my experience, what I've found is sometimes the time deviation is so big that it can't actually do it automatically. So you may need to change your time and then configure NTP time. In this case, it worked properly. So it's gone black. Okay, so we've got our shared storage. We've got NTP time. Another guideline for NTP time, if you have a bigger environment and you have your own NTP server, obviously use that. Another guideline I've heard is to use the PDC emulator, point everything in your environment to your PDC emulator, set that up as a NTP time server, and then have your PDC emulator use an internet source for its time. And that's to ensure that your environment is always synced with the PDC emulator in terms of time. So let me see. And then, so this is the optional one I was talking about. I prefer, particularly in a lab environment, to enable SSH, so you can directly SSH into the box. So to do that, we come down here to Security Profile, Services, SSH. And again, you want to, in this case, I'm going to start. I'm going to go OK and come out. SSH options, start with the host. OK. So you can see it's running. Now we're going to get yelled at for that. So SSH for the host has been enabled. Another one, so we're no longer getting the error message that we have no shared storage because we now have iSCSI. We are getting a warning message that no core dump has been configured. Core dumps, when you get a purple screen of death, if you're using auto deploy, it's got nowhere to store those logs since everything is stored directly in memory, so you're not going to really be able to troubleshoot that issue. So having a core dump server configured can be helpful in that. VMware does have a product, and I'll be going through configuring that when we do more advanced host profiles. System logs, this is another one. It's the same issue. There's nowhere to store the system logs that are going to be retained after a reboot since everything's in memory. So I'm going to set that up next. But before I do that, I'm going to update the host profile. Oops, wait a second. See how I almost overwrote all the changes I just made. That's not what I want to do. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. What I really wanted to do, let's go to host profile. No, we don't want to do that either. We want to go to home, host profile. Update profile from reference host. Now why is it not? Sorry, I'm not sure why that's grayed out there. Oh, maybe because I removed it and added it back in. Okay, so I've updated that. Now we're going to update profile from reference host. Now this can take a couple of minutes to complete. You can see it's in progress there. Now I'll go through why I'm doing that at this point, because the next change that I'm going to make is to add the system logs to persistent storage, and that one I'm going to do here in host profiles rather than directly on the machine. It's just there are a few reasons for that. I'll go through them as I do it. Had I not updated the profile from the reference host, if I'd come in here and I'd made the change and done the reverse, I would have lost all those other changes that I'd made directly on the host. So that's something you really want to pay attention to. You can overwrite your changes, and you don't always know why. You think you did it properly. At least I do. I mean, I've been in that situation a few times, and that is probably going to be the reason. So let's come in here to System Global Log. This is the setting here. Global Log Directory. Wait a second. I don't know. Hold on just a minute. Let me find where I'm supposed to go. I'm back. So there was actually something I wanted to demonstrate, particularly with the system logs on persistent storage. It's a bit of a quirk, to say the least, very frustrating. If you come down to syslog global, this is where you set it on the host itself. In my case, it's SCSI scratch log. Now, you'll notice that is correct in terms of the example here. The example would actually be like this: /scratch/log. If you do use this, it won't work. At least in my personal experience, you need to remove that / and put a space. There actually is a knowledge base article about that. I'll include that with the in the comments. If you're having issues getting this to work, this is probably what your problem is. So I'm going to set that. Back here to summary. I'm going to go into our storage, our iSCSI storage, scratch log, and there it is. So nh1.ITDEMOGUY.ca, you can see it's dumping its logs in there now. So we now have gotten rid of, hopefully, yeah, so we've gotten rid of that error saying that syslogs are not stored on persistent storage. But once again, like always, don't forget to come in here to host profiles and update profile from reference host. So now that that's done, we've got a profile, and we've also pre-staged 4 nested hosts in Workstation. What you need to do next is come into your deployment rules, and we're going to add a deploy rule for the profile. Okay. I'll add all this code here to the description field as well. So now you can see there are now 3 rules. We've got an image rule, we've got a cluster rule, and we've got a profile rule. The profile rule specifies nh1 to be used as the profile. If I come in here to host profiles, nh1 is what we've called it. So in theory, if we've done all our pre-staging properly, I should be able to throw the switch on all these hosts. They should come into the vCenter one by one, have the host profile applied, and they should be in the exact same state as this one is. So this one has storage, it has NTP configured, it has a modification of the security profile to turn on SSH. We've got our syslogs being stored on persistent storage. Let's give it a shot. So to do the testing, because rebooting takes a little time, first of all, I'm going to reboot this one. I want to make sure that this one works properly. This is our reference host. Now also, I have some limited resources here on the actual machine itself. It's only got, I think it's 12 gigs of memory. Yeah, 12 gigs of memory, so I mean 4 gigs per virtual machine. I'm going to run out pretty quick, so I think I'll just run 2 at a time. and as they work, I'm going to bring the other ones down. The end goal, I'll have 4 machines that have been added in here at one point. They may not all, I can't have them all on at the same time, but for testing purposes, I'm going to bring all 4 of them up, make sure they all get the same profile settings, and I will come back when all that's done to verify that it's worked properly. Okay, so it looks like we're done here. So what I've done is, because I don't have the resources to have all of these hosts on at the same time, I've just taken the first one down and then I booted them one at a time after that. So as you can see, I'm a little constrained for RAM, but once this refreshes, what we'll see is that each of the hosts has the shared storage, has the NTP time settings, has all those other things configured, and that is going to make it considerably easier for us when we're working with auto deploy. There's a whole lot of settings that you can configure that are going to be unique to your environment. I just went through some of the ones that I consider to be the most basic and basically required in pretty much all situations. The optional one being the enabling SSH host, which you're going to get a warning for. You can suppress that, but I'm just going to leave it on. So okay, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.